Welcome back to Infidelity Tales Lab. We're incredibly grateful for your support. Before we begin today's tale, tell us, which city or country are you joining us from? We love connecting with our global audience. Now, let's dive into today's story. The Judge's Gambit. Chapter 1. Fractures. Nathan Doherty stared at the envelope in his hands, the law firm's embossed letterhead glimmering under his kitchen lights. At 42, he'd spent 15 years building a respectable career as a criminal defense attorney in Portland, and even longer building what he'd thought was a solid marriage to Vanessa. Another late night? His wife's voice startled him. Vanessa leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. At 38, she remained strikingly beautiful with her auburn hair and calculating green eyes. Their relationship had grown increasingly strained over the past year. The Morales case. Judge Hoffman wants additional briefs by morning. Nathan tucked the envelope into his briefcase. The lie came easily now, just as Vanessa's did. Of course he does. She rolled her eyes. Don't forget we have dinner with Blake tomorrow night. Nathan nodded, trying not to grimace. Blake Russo was Vanessa's new friend, a charismatic detective with the Portland PD who had been spending an unusual amount of time at their house lately. Nathan had noticed the lingering glances between them, the inside jokes, the subtle touches. I won't forget. He watched her retreat upstairs, then pulled out the envelope again. Inside was proof of what he'd suspected for months. Detailed surveillance photos of Vanessa and Blake together, entering hotels, kissing in his car. The private investigator had been thorough. What hurt most wasn't just the betrayal, but how they laughed together in the photos, clearly at his expense. Nathan poured himself a whiskey and considered his options. Direct confrontation would be predictable. Divorce would be messy, especially given Vanessa's brother Dominic Sullivan's position as district attorney. The Sullivan family had powerful connections throughout the state's legal system. He'd been warned about their influence when he'd married Vanessa, but he'd been too in love to care. His phone buzzed with a text from his law partner, Miles Hargrove. Found something big on the Callaway case. Can't talk on phone. Meet at office at 11. The Callaway case had been troubling Nathan for weeks. Thomas Callaway, a wealthy real estate developer, stood accused of orchestrating a series of investment scams. Nathan had taken the case despite his instincts. The firm needed the money after losing several major clients. At the office, Miles paced nervously. I shouldn't be showing you this, he said, sliding a flash drive across the desk. My cousin works in digital forensics for the FBI. He found these while analyzing Callaway's devices. Nathan plugged in the drive and froze at what he saw. Encrypted messages between Callaway and Dominic Sullivan discussing the laundering of campaign funds. Your brother-in-law is dirty, Nate. And there's more. Look at the next folder. Heart pounding. Nathan clicked through and found photos of himself edited into compromising positions with what appeared to be underage girls. The metadata showed they'd been created 6 months ago. They're building an insurance policy against you, Miles said quietly, in case you discover something they don't want found. Why would they? Because Callaway's not just Sullivan's donor. They're partners in something bigger. I think you were assigned this case deliberately. They're using you. Nathan's mind raced. The late night calls Vanessa took in the bathroom. Her brother's a sudden interest in his casework. Blake Russo's convenient appearance in their lives. What are you going to do? Miles asked. Nathan closed the laptop slowly. I need to think. That night, he noticed Vanessa texting constantly at dinner. When she went to shower, he checked her phone using the password he'd watched her enter countless times. The messages with Blake confirmed his worst fears. Blake, is he buying the story about tomorrow? Vanessa, completely. He's clueless. Blake, the handcuffs are ready. Dom's given the green light. Vanessa, can't wait to see his face when he realizes what's happening. Blake, after this, he'll never recover professionally. Nathan's blood ran cold. They weren't just having an affair. They were planning something to destroy him. Something involving handcuffs. He returned the phone just as the shower stopped. Everything okay, honey? Vanessa asked, emerging in her silk robe, hair wrapped in a towel. Never better, Nathan replied with a practiced smile. Just tired. That night, he couldn't sleep. The foundation of his life was crumbling. His marriage was a sham, his career was being manipulated, And tomorrow, they planned to spring some kind of trap. He slipped out of bed at 3 a.m. and went to his home office, where he accessed his secure files. If they wanted to destroy him, he needed insurance. He'd been quietly documenting irregularities in several of Dominic Sullivan's prosecutions for years, just in case. It was time to prepare for war. As dawn broke, Nathan made 3 decisions. He would confront the trap head-on. He would gather every piece of evidence possible about Sullivan's corruption. And when the time came, he would disappear so completely that when they saw him again, it would be on his terms. He just never imagined how soon that would be. Chapter 2. The Ambush. The restaurant Blake had chosen for dinner was upscale, even by Portland standards. A renovated warehouse overlooking the Willamette River with exposed brick walls and ambient lighting. Nathan arrived separately from Vanessa, who had claimed a hair appointment as an excuse to drive with Blake. From his corner table, Nathan watched them enter together, laughing intimately. Vanessa's hand lingered on Blake's arm a moment too long before they spotted Nathan and shifted to a more appropriate distance apart. "Sorry we're late," Vanessa said, air-kissing his cheek. Her perfume was new, something she'd never worn for him. Blake extended his hand. "Good to see you, counselor. Busy day in court." "Illuminating," Nathan replied, shaking the detective's hand firmly. "I've been reviewing some fascinating evidence." A flicker of concern passed between Vanessa and Blake. "Evidence?" Vanessa asked, too casually. "Just a case," Nathan said. "Nothing you'd find interesting." Dinner proceeded with careful small talk. Nathan noticed Vanessa check her phone repeatedly under the table. Blake kept glancing toward the entrance. "Is everything all right?" Nathan asked innocently. "You both seem distracted." "Just waiting for a work call," Blake said smoothly. The trap, whatever it was, would spring soon. Nathan excused himself to the restroom, where he activated the recording device in his jacket pocket and the backup one in his watch, both legal in Oregon as single-party consent recordings. When he returned, a third cocktail awaited him, one he hadn't ordered. "I took the liberty," Blake said. "The bartender makes an excellent old-fashioned." Nathan pretended to sip while actually letting the liquid touch his closed lips. Within minutes, he began acting increasingly intoxicated, slurring slightly, relaxing his posture. "Maybe we should get some fresh air," Vanessa suggested, exchanging a meaningful look with Blake. They guided him toward the river walk behind the restaurant. The evening was cool, the walkway relatively deserted. Perfect for whatever they had planned. "You know," Nathan said, deliberately stumbling slightly, "I've been thinking about trust lately." "Fascinating concept." "Oh," Vanessa's voice was tight. "MMM. In my profession, you learn to read people. Their tells. Their secrets." He turned to face them both. Their betrayals. Blake's hand moved subtly toward his hip where Nathan knew he kept his service weapon. "What are you talking about, Nathan?" Vanessa asked. "I'm talking about the fact that my wife is sleeping with a detective who's in her brother's pocket," Nathan said clearly, dropping the intoxicated act. "And that you're both planning something involving handcuffs tonight." Their shocked expressions confirmed everything. "You're drunk," Blake recovered quickly. "And paranoid." "Am I?" Nathan pulled out his phone and played a segment of Vanessa's conversation with Blake from the previous day, a backup recording he'd made. "The handcuffs are ready. Dom's given the green light." Vanessa's face drained of color. "You went through my phone?" "You were planning to destroy me," Nathan countered. "What was it going to be? False arrest? Public humiliation?" Blake stepped closer, menace replacing his friendly facade. "You have no idea what you're messing with, Doherty. Sullivan will." "Will what? Frame me? Ruin me? Plant evidence?" "I know about his connection to Callaway. I know about the campaign fund laundering." Blake's expression hardened. He reached for his handcuffs. "Nathan Doherty, you're under arrest for professional misconduct and evidence tampering in the Callaway case." "On what authority?" Nathan demanded, backing away. "This is outside your jurisdiction, and you haven't read me my rights." "I don't need authority when I have this," Blake said, pulling out his phone and showing a screen full of images. The same doctored photos of Nathan with underage girls that Miles had discovered. "We were going to do this quietly," Vanessa said. "Give you a chance to resign and disappear. Instead, these go public tomorrow. Your career is over. So this was the plan? Handcuff me, threaten me, destroy my reputation with fake evidence. The evidence isn't fake, Blake said with a cruel smile. It's on your home computer right now. The search warrant is already being executed. Nathan felt cold dread. They were setting him up completely. Nice try, he said, reaching for his phone to call his law partner. Blake moved with sudden speed, knocking the phone from Nathan's hand into the river and slamming him against the railing. The handcuffs clicked around Nathan's wrists as sirens wailed in the distance. Good luck explaining this one. Vanessa cackled as two patrol cars pulled up. By morning, everyone will think you're a pedophile. Blake's grip tightened painfully. Your office is being searched right now, too. They'll find everything we need. As the officers approached, Nathan made his decision. With a sudden twist, he broke free from Blake's loosened grip and vaulted over the railing into the dark river below. Stop him, Blake shouted as Nathan hit the water. The cold shock nearly paralyzed him, but adrenaline and desperation drove him to swim underwater as long as his lungs would allow, letting the current carry him downstream. When he surfaced, he was already in the shadows beneath a pier. Above, flashlights swept the water surface. Nathan dove again, swimming farther from the search, his hands still cuffed in front of him. He'd anticipated something tonight, but nothing this elaborate or vicious. By the time he dragged himself onto a maintenance ladder at an industrial dock a half-mile downriver, the sirens had multiplied. His life as Nathan Doherty was effectively over. They'd planted evidence, prepared false accusations, and set him up perfectly. But they'd underestimated him, and they would regret that. Soaking wet and shivering in the handcuffs, Nathan disappeared into the night, beginning his transformation from hunted man to someone else entirely. Someone who would one day return to deliver justice of his own making. Chapter 3. Vanishing Point. The abandoned waterfront warehouse had been Nathan's contingency plan for months, ever since he'd first suspected Vanessa's infidelity. Inside a rusted locker was a waterproof bag containing cash, clothes, a prepaid phone, and a small toolkit. He'd never imagined actually needing it. With numb fingers, he managed to pick the handcuff locks using a technique he'd learned from a former client. As the cuffs fell away, reality sank in. By morning, he would be Portland's most wanted man. His first call was to Miles. Jesus Christ, Nate, where are you? The police are everywhere. They found those images on your computer and files suggesting you've been tampering with evidence. It's a setup, Miles. Sullivan, Vanessa, and that cop Blake planned the whole thing. I believe you, but it doesn't matter. The evidence looks real. They're saying you jumped in the river to escape arrest. Some are suggesting you might have drowned. Nathan considered this. Let them think that. What? If they believe I drowned, it gives me time. Time for what, Nate? You need to turn yourself in. Get a lawyer. Not me, someone unconnected. Fight this properly. That's exactly what they want. The system is their weapon, Miles. Sullivan controls too many people. Then what's your plan? I need to disappear. Completely. And I need your help one last time. Miles hesitated. I've got kids, Nate. A family. I know. That's why after tonight, we never speak again. But I need you to secure something for me first. After explaining what he needed, Nathan ended the call and destroyed the phone. By dawn, he had shaved his head, applied a temporary beard, and changed his appearance completely. The man who stared back from the cracked warehouse mirror looked nothing like the respected attorney Nathan Doherty. At 6 a.m., he watched a local news broadcast on a small battery-powered television. Portland attorney Nathan Doherty is missing and presumed drowned after fleeing police attempting to arrest him on serious charges. Doherty, a criminal defense attorney, was allegedly found to be in possession of child exploitation material and evidence of professional misconduct. The attorney jumped into the Willamette River while handcuffed and hasn't been seen since. Search efforts continue. The smug face of Dominic Sullivan appeared on screen. As district attorney, I'm deeply disturbed by these allegations against someone who worked within our justice system. Rest assured, we will conduct a thorough investigation regardless of whether Mr. Doherty is found. Nathan turned off the television. Sullivan's performance was convincing, a concerned public official hiding his role in destroying an innocent man. That afternoon, Miles made the drop at their predetermined location, a bus station locker containing Nathan's insurance policy, copies of every piece of evidence he'd gathered on Sullivan's corrupt activities over the years, plus a USB drive with something even more valuable. "I'm sorry," Miles said when they briefly met, careful to avoid security cameras. "I couldn't get everything. They've seized most of your files. Did you get the recordings from my home office?" Miles nodded. "The backup server they didn't know about?" "Yes, and I've done what you asked with the offshore accounts. But Nate, the money won't last forever. It doesn't need to, just long enough." They parted without further words. Miles would claim he'd been approached by a homeless man matching Nathan's general description, maintaining plausible deniability. Over the next week, Nathan moved between budget motels, using cash and keeping his head down. Reports about his case continued, with sources close to the investigation suggesting he'd been working with corrupt clients for years. His reputation was being systematically destroyed. Meanwhile, Nathan studied the evidence he'd gathered. Sullivan's corruption went deeper than he'd imagined. Rigged cases, witness intimidation, evidence tampering. But the most valuable piece was unexpected. A recording from Nathan's home office security system of Vanessa and Blake discussing their plan while Nathan was at work. "Once the images are planted, Dom will move immediately for a search warrant," Blake was saying. "The judge owes him a favor. And if Nathan tries to fight it?" Vanessa asked. "That's where the handcuffs come in. Public arrest, maximum humiliation. By the time he can mount any defense, his reputation will be destroyed. Dom gets a potential threat eliminated, you get a clean divorce with everything, and I get my promotion. In Calloway's case, reassigned to someone more cooperative. Nobody looks too closely at the money. Everybody wins." Nathan had what he needed, proof of the conspiracy. But he couldn't use it yet. Going public now would only make him look desperate. Sullivan would twist it, claim the recordings were doctored. No, he needed to disappear more completely than they could imagine. He needed to remake himself entirely. And then, when they least expected it, he would return from the dead with the power to destroy them as thoroughly as they'd tried to destroy him. After 2 weeks of careful planning, Nathan left Portland behind. The security footage from his home office, along with all his other evidence, was sealed in a weatherproof container and buried at a marked location only he knew. His remaining cash was converted to gold coins and similarly secured in separate locations. With a new identity, Daniel Newton, created through connections from former clients, he boarded a bus to Chicago. There, using forged credentials, he secured a position as a legal researcher at Northwestern University's law library. It was the first step in a years-long journey that would transform him from a disgraced attorney presumed dead into something his enemies would never see coming. A federal judge with the power to pass sentence on them all. As the bus pulled away from Portland, Nathan looked back at the city skyline one last time. He thought of Vanessa's mocking laugh as the handcuffs closed around his wrists and Blake's cruel smile. "Good luck explaining this one," they'd said. They had no idea what was coming. Chapter 4, Chrysalis. Chicago winters were brutal, but Daniel Newton endured them like penance. 3 years had passed since Nathan Doherty's death, and with each passing day, his new identity solidified. The small apartment above a Polish deli in Wicker Park bore no resemblance to the modernist home he'd shared with Vanessa. The legal researcher's salary paid his modest bills while allowing him to fade into academic obscurity. His transformation hadn't been merely physical, though the shaved head was now replaced by close-cropped silver-gray hair, and he'd grown a neatly trimmed beard. The changes ran deeper. He'd systematically reconstructed his entire persona, from his handwriting to his speech patterns. The soft Northwestern accent he'd cultivated replaced his native Oregon inflections. The university library became his fortress, and constitutional law his new specialty. He published scholarly articles under his new name, building a reputation for incisive analysis of judicial precedent. His particular focus, judicial misconduct and accountability, was no coincidence. "You're wasted here, Dan," said Marilyn Alconquo, the law library's director, sliding his latest publication across her desk. The Yale Law Journal doesn't accept submissions from mere researchers. You should be teaching. Daniel smiled modestly. I prefer the quiet life. With a mind like yours? Come on. She studied him with a penetrating gaze that had made her a formidable presence in Chicago legal circles. You know, Judge Sanderson mentioned your article on judicial appointment precedents. He asked if you'd ever considered applying for a clerkship. Judge Walter Sanderson, Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals, a respected jurist with connections to the Justice Department. I'm a bit old for clerkship, Marilyn. Age discrimination is illegal, Dan, she said with a wink. Besides, Sanderson likes experience. Says too many clerks come straight from law school knowing theory, but not reality. That evening, Daniel researched Sanderson thoroughly. The judge was approaching retirement, had impeccable credentials, and most importantly, sat on the committee that recommended candidates for federal judicial appointments. This was an opportunity Daniel couldn't manufacture. It had presented itself organically through his work. The path forward suddenly crystallized, from researcher to clerk to federal magistrate, judge to district court judge. The timeline might be accelerated with the right connections and strategic leveraging of his growing academic reputation. 2 months later, Daniel Newton became Judge Sanderson's newest clerk. Your background check came back oddly thin, Sanderson mentioned casually one evening as they worked late. Not many personal connections. Daniel had prepared for this. My wife died of cancer 8 years ago. We were both only children, no family left. Started fresh in Chicago after she passed. Sanderson nodded sympathetically. I'm sorry. Explains the intensity of your work ethic. But you should know, Dan, there's life after loss. Perhaps someday, Daniel said, allowing genuine emotion to color his voice. The loss he felt wasn't fictional, just different from what Sanderson imagined. The judge became his mentor, impressed by Daniel's legal mind and work ethic. When Sanderson recommended him for a federal magistrate judge position 18 months later, the nomination proceeded smoothly, aided by Daniel's growing reputation in legal journals and his connections to Northwestern's law faculty. At 47, Magistrate Judge Daniel Newton was young for the position, but respected for his fairness and thorough knowledge of procedure. His particular skill was in getting hostile parties to reach settlements, a talent Judge Sanderson attributed to Daniel's ability to see 3 moves ahead. The magistrate position was a crucial step. It allowed Daniel to build relationships with district judges, prosecutors, and defense attorneys, all while maintaining his carefully constructed persona. Meanwhile, Daniel monitored events in Portland from afar. Dominic Sullivan had risen to state attorney general, with Blake Russo now a captain in the police department. Vanessa had married Blake after a suitably respectful period following her first husband's death. The Callaway case had been quietly resolved with minimal charges, just as they'd planned. On the 5th anniversary of Nathan Doherty's disappearance, Portland's local news ran a small retrospective piece. Disgraced attorney's case remains open. The story mentioned that while Nathan was presumed drowned, his body had never been recovered, keeping the case technically unsolved. That same week, Judge Sanderson called Daniel to his chambers. I'm retiring next year, he said without preamble, and I've recommended you for appointment to the federal district court. Daniel maintained his composure despite his racing heart. That's quite a leap from magistrate. Not with your record and publications. The selection committee was impressed with your article on judicial independence. The timing's right, too. The administration wants to appoint judges with centrist credentials and unimpeachable ethics records. I'm honored by your confidence. Sanderson waved away the formality. Cut the modesty, Dan. You've been positioning yourself for this since the day I met you. The careful publication record, the strategic case selections, cultivating relationships with the right people. I've watched you play a long game. For a moment, Daniel feared his mentor had seen through him. Don't look alarmed, Sanderson continued. It's what all ambitious people do. I did the same 30 years ago. The difference is you might actually deserve the position. The nomination process for the Northern District of Illinois was rigorous but proceeded without complications. Daniel Newton's background check revealed nothing concerning. His constructed history held firm. His confirmation hearings were uneventful. His judicial philosophy appealed to senators from both parties. At 49, Daniel Newton became a federal district court judge with lifetime tenure. The day after his investiture ceremony, Judge Newton sat alone in his new chambers, contemplating the framed oath on his wall. For the first time in 7 years, he allowed himself to fully remember being Nathan Doherty, the life stolen from him, the humiliation orchestrated by his wife and her lover. He opened his laptop and searched for recent news from Portland. Dominic Sullivan was rumored to be considering a run for governor. The article mentioned his sister Vanessa Russo and her husband, Captain Blake Russo, as key supporters of his potential campaign. Judge Newton closed the browser and pulled a secure flash drive from his desk. On it was a single document he'd been updating for years, a meticulously crafted transfer request for a visiting judge assignment to the District of Oregon. Such temporary assignments were common when courts faced backlog or when judges had specialized expertise needed for particular cases. He hadn't submitted it yet. The timing needed to be perfect. That evening, Judge Newton received a call from a court administrator about an unusual request. The District of Oregon needed a visiting judge for a high-profile case where most local judges had recused themselves due to conflicts of interest. Given Judge Newton's background in constitutional law and lack of connections to Oregon's legal community, would he consider the temporary assignment? He allowed himself exactly 3 seconds of satisfaction before responding with measured professional interest. "I'd be happy to serve where needed," he said. "What's the case?" The administrator explained, United States versus Lawrence Sullivan, a federal corruption case against a prominent state senator. The defendant was District Attorney Dominic Sullivan's father-in-law. The coincidence was almost too perfect. Daniel hadn't engineered this opportunity. Fate had delivered it. "I'll need to review the case details before making a final decision," he said. But tentatively, yes. As he hung up, Daniel Newton allowed Nathan Doherty's voice to surface in his mind for the first time in years. "They never saw me coming." Chapter 5. Wheels Within Wheels. Judge Daniel Newton's temporary chambers in the Portland Federal Courthouse were austere but functional. Through the window, he could see the Willamette River, the same waters that had swallowed Nathan Doherty 7 years earlier. His first week as visiting judge had been deliberately low profile. He'd kept to himself, learned the layout of the courthouse, and familiarized himself with the local procedures. Few paid attention to the visiting judge from Chicago handling routine matters while preparing for the Sullivan case. But Daniel knew that would change tomorrow when the preliminary hearing in United States versus Lawrence Sullivan began. The case involved allegations that Senator Lawrence Sullivan had accepted bribes to influence state contracts, charges that threatened not only the senator, but potentially his son-in-law Dominic's political aspirations as well. His phone buzzed with a message from his carefully cultivated source in the clerk's office. "Prosecution filing supplemental witness list this afternoon. D. Sullivan and B. Russo both added." Perfect. Dominic Sullivan and Blake Russo would both appear in his courtroom, neither knowing who truly sat in judgment. A knock interrupted his thoughts. "Your Honor?" The chief judge would like a word. Chief Judge Helen Parr was a formidable woman in her 60s with a reputation for running a tight ship. Her steel-gray hair matched her no-nonsense demeanor. "Judge Newton, settling in all right?" she asked after he was seated in her office. "Very well, thank you." "Good. I'll be direct. The Sullivan case is politically charged. Every ruling will be scrutinized. I'm aware of the sensitivities." "Are you?" She studied him. "Your background check showed no connections to Oregon, but I've learned to look deeper. Anyone with potential conflicts should recuse themselves immediately." Daniel met her gaze steadily. "I assure you, I have no conflicts that would affect my impartiality." It wasn't technically a lie. Nathan Doherty had conflicts. Daniel Newton did not. "I hope not. This courthouse has seen enough scandal." She softened slightly. "That said, your reputation from Chicago is impressive. Judge Sanderson speaks highly of you. He's a good man. I learned a great deal from him." "Well, you'll need all that learning. The Sullivan family has significant influence here." Daniel allowed himself a thin smile. In my experience, Judge Parr, influence stops at the courtroom door. That evening, Daniel ordered dinner to his hotel room and spread out the case files. The evidence against Senator Sullivan was substantial. Recorded conversations, bank records showing suspicious deposits, witness statements. The prosecution's case seemed solid. But Daniel was more interested in the threads connecting the senator to his son-in-law Dominic's activities. If followed carefully, those threads might lead to revelations about other matters, perhaps even the framing of a Portland defense attorney years ago. His secure phone buzzed with a message from Miles Hargrove, the only person who knew Nathan Doherty hadn't drowned. They're nervous about the visiting judge. Source says DS tried to get info on you, but came up empty. Daniel responded, maintain distance. Proceed as discussed. Miles had been crucial to the plan, quietly gathering intelligence from his position in Portland's legal community while maintaining plausible deniability. His law firm now handled sensitive cases for corporate clients, keeping him connected to local legal gossip without attracting attention. The next morning, Judge Newton entered his courtroom precisely on time, his black robes settling around him like armor. He'd prepared meticulously for this moment, reviewing recordings of Daniel Newton's speaking patterns and mannerisms to ensure not a trace of Nathan Doherty showed through. All rise, the bailiff called. The United States District Court for the District of Oregon is now in session, the Honorable Daniel Newton presiding. Daniel took his seat and surveyed the courtroom. The prosecution table was staffed by assistant U.S. attorneys he didn't recognize. The defense team included several high-priced attorneys from a prestigious firm. And there, in the gallery behind them, sat Dominic Sullivan, now Oregon's Attorney General, looking confident in an expensive suit. Beside him was Blake Russo, his police captain's uniform replaced by civilian clothes for this appearance. There was no sign of Vanessa. Be seated, Daniel said, his voice neutral and authoritative. We're here for preliminary matters in United States versus Sullivan. Are all parties present? As the attorneys identified themselves, Daniel felt Dominic Sullivan studying him intently. Their eyes met briefly across the courtroom. Sullivan clearly trying to gauge this unknown judge who held his father-in-law's fate in his hands. Daniel revealed nothing, his face the perfect judicial mask cultivated through years of preparation. The hearing proceeded normally until the matter of the witness list arose. Your Honor, the lead prosecutor said, we've added 2 witnesses to our list, Attorney General Dominic Sullivan and Captain Blake Russo. Both have relevant testimony regarding conversations with the defendant. The defense attorney immediately objected. Your Honor, this is clearly a political maneuver designed to embarrass key public officials. Attorney General Sullivan's relationship to the defendant shouldn't make him a target. Daniel considered the arguments, then spoke deliberately. The witness list stands. However, I'll review any testimony for relevance before allowing it in open court. He noticed Sullivan and Russo exchange glances. They hadn't expected that ruling. Additionally, Daniel continued, this court will not tolerate attempts to try this case in the media. Any party leaking details will face sanctions. That evening, local news coverage focused on the strict Chicago judge taking control of the Sullivan case. Political commentators speculated about the implications for Dominic Sullivan's gubernatorial ambitions if his father-in-law were convicted. Back in his hotel, Daniel received an expected call from Chief Judge Parr. I understand you approve the witness list, including the Attorney General. The prosecution made their case for relevance, Daniel replied calmly. You're aware of the political implications? Justice doesn't recognize political convenience, Judge Parr. She was silent for a moment. Just be careful, Newton. There are currents here you might not fully appreciate. Thank you for your concern. After hanging up, Daniel opened his laptop to check his secure email. Miles had sent him a crucial update. Vanessa had returned from a trip to Aspen and was expected to attend tomorrow's proceedings to support her brother and husband. All the players would finally be in place. The next morning, Daniel arrived early to review last-minute filings. Through his chamber's window, he watched the courthouse steps where reporters gathered. A black SUV pulled up, and Dominic Sullivan emerged, flanked by Blake Russo and, finally, Vanessa. She looked different, her auburn hair shorter, her face somewhat harder despite her designer clothes and careful makeup. Seeing her again after 7 years sent an unexpected jolt through Daniel. Not of longing, but of cold recognition. This woman had helped destroy Nathan Doherty without remorse. In the courtroom, Daniel noticed Vanessa sitting directly behind her brother, her eyes fixed on the proceedings with apparent boredom. She barely glanced at the judge presiding over her former brother-in-law's case. The session involved technical arguments about evidence admissibility. Daniel ruled methodically, his decisions balanced enough to give neither side cause for complaint. He was building a reputation for meticulous fairness that would make any later actions unassailable. During a brief recess, Daniel returned to chambers and found a business card on his desk. Dominic Sullivan, Attorney General with a handwritten note, would appreciate a brief professional courtesy meeting. DS. The audacity was impressive. Sullivan was attempting to establish a back channel to the judge overseeing his father-in-law's case. Daniel pocketed the card without response. The trap was being baited piece by careful piece. When court resumed, he noticed Sullivan watching him more intently, clearly wondering why his note had been ignored. That evening, Daniel activated the final phase of his preparation. Using a secure connection, he accessed the encrypted server where he'd stored all evidence of the conspiracy against Nathan Doherty. With methodical precision, he organized the materials into an airtight timeline. The fabricated evidence, the coordinated plan between Sullivan, Vanessa, and Blake, the planted images, the rigged Callaway case. Everything was there, properly preserved with chain of custody documentation Miles had secretly prepared years ago. Tomorrow would bring the first true test, his direct questioning of witnesses in a pre-trial evidentiary hearing. Dominic Sullivan was scheduled to testify about conversations with his father-in-law regarding campaign contributions. As Daniel reviewed his carefully prepared questions, his secure phone buzzed with an alert from the courthouse security system he'd gained access to through a carefully cultivated IT contact. Someone was attempting to access his chambers. Through the security feed on his laptop, Daniel watched as Blake Russo used what appeared to be a key card to enter the restricted area. The former detective moved with professional caution, quickly searched the desk, then photographed several documents before leaving. Daniel smiled thinly. They were getting nervous, resorting to illegal tactics. And they'd just committed a federal crime in a federal courthouse. One captured on video he now controlled. Another piece in place. The next morning, Daniel entered his courtroom with an air of somber authority. At the appropriate moment, he looked directly at Dominic Sullivan and spoke. This court has received information about a potential breach of chamber security. Federal marshals will be investigating. If anyone has information about unauthorized access to judicial offices, now would be the time to come forward. He watched Blake Russo pale slightly, while Sullivan maintained his poker face. Vanessa glanced between them, clearly sensing something was wrong. None of them recognized the judge whose life they had destroyed. But soon, very soon they would. And by then, it would be far too late. Chapter 6. Recognition. The Portland Federal Courthouse buzzed with tension. 3 weeks into United States versus Sullivan, Judge Daniel Newton had established himself as methodically fair but utterly unyielding. A combination that frustrated attorneys on both sides who were accustomed to more flexibility from a bench. In his hotel room, Daniel reviewed the case progression. The prosecution had presented substantial evidence of Senator Sullivan's corruption. The defense had fought fiercely, but was clearly concerned. Most importantly, Dominic Sullivan's testimony had revealed inconsistencies that opened doors to new lines of inquiry, exactly as Daniel had anticipated. His phone rang. Miles Hargrove, using their secure line. "They're digging into your background," Miles said without preamble. "Sullivan's got people looking beyond the official records." "Expected. Anything concerning?" "Not yet, but they're persistent. Sullivan seems unusually worried about you." Daniel allowed himself a small smile. "Interesting. There's more." Vanessa's been asking questions about Nathan's old cases, specifically Callaway. This was unexpected. "Why now?" "Something spooked them. Maybe your rulings, maybe just instinct." The Sullivans have always had a sixth sense for threats. Daniel considered this development. Is the package secure? Yes. Ready when you are. The package contained all evidence of the conspiracy against Nathan Doherty, preserved with proper chain of custody documentation. It sat in a secured location, waiting for the perfect moment. Not yet, Daniel said. Let them worry a little longer. The next morning, court security reported a bizarre incident. Someone had apparently accessed personnel records, trying to find information on Judge Newton. The breach had been detected quickly, but marked an escalation in behind-the-scenes maneuvering. Daniel used the incident to implement enhanced security protocols, including additional cameras in the courtroom and corridors. Every move Sullivan, Blake, or Vanessa made in the courthouse would now be recorded from multiple angles. That afternoon, Daniel scheduled a critical evidentiary hearing. Captain Blake Russo would testify about conversations with Senator Sullivan regarding campaign contributions, a peripheral matter to the main case, but central to Daniel's larger plan. As Blake took the stand, Daniel studied the man who had once put handcuffs on Nathan Doherty as part of a cruel setup. Russo had aged well, his confident manner suggesting a man comfortable with authority. But Daniel detected an underlying nervousness in his clipped responses. Captain Russo, Daniel began after preliminary questions, please describe your relationship with Attorney General Sullivan. Blake shifted slightly. Professional and personal. He's my brother-in-law. And you're married to Vanessa Russo, formerly Doherty? A flicker of surprise crossed Blake's face at the judge's knowledge of this detail. Yes, Your Honor. How long have you known the Attorney General? About 8 years. Daniel noted the time frame, just before Blake had entered Nathan and Vanessa's life. And during this time, have you ever discussed case matters with him that didn't directly involve your official duties? Defense counsel immediately objected. Relevance, Your Honor, goes to witness credibility and potential bias, Daniel responded coolly. Overruled. Blake hesitated. Occasionally. Nothing improper. For instance, Daniel pressed. I don't recall specifics. Daniel consulted his notes. Does the name Nathan Doherty refresh your recollection? The courtroom stilled. Blake's expression froze. From the gallery, Daniel could sense Dominic Sullivan suddenly paying much closer attention. Doherty was a defense attorney who disappeared about 7 years ago, Blake said carefully. While handcuffed, I believe, Daniel added, his tone neutral. Did you discuss that case with Attorney General Sullivan, who was district attorney at the time? The defense attorney stood again. Your Honor, this is far afield from the matter at hand. Daniel fixed the attorney with a steady gaze. The court is exploring potential patterns of conduct relevant to witness credibility. The question stands. Blake cleared his throat. Yes, we discussed it. It was a high-profile disappearance. Were you present when Mr. Doherty was handcuffed? Blake's composure slipped momentarily. Yes. On what charge? Possession of illegal material and evidence tampering. Charges that were never formally filed because the suspect disappeared, Daniel noted. Interesting. Daniel glanced toward the gallery, where Vanessa was sitting forward, her face suddenly pale. For the first time, she was really looking at the judge, studying his features, his mannerisms. Your Honor, the defense attorney interjected, this entire line of questioning seems designed to embarrass the witness rather than address relevant testimony. I disagree, Daniel replied. The court has an interest in understanding witness credibility, particularly regarding relationships with other parties in this case. He returned his attention to Blake. Captain Russo, would you say your career benefited from your relationship with the Sullivan family? Blake's jaw tightened. I earned my promotions. Of course. One last question. Do you recall the exact words you said to Nathan Doherty when you placed him in handcuffs? The courtroom went completely silent. Blake stared at Daniel, comprehension slowly dawning in his eyes. I don't recall, he said hoarsely. Really? It was quite memorable, according to the record. Something about good luck explaining this one, wasn't it? Blake's face drained of color. In the gallery, Vanessa gasped audibly, her hand flying to her mouth as she stared at Daniel, truly seeing him for the first time. Before Blake could respond, Daniel continued smoothly. The record notes that similar language was used in another case. The court is merely establishing patterns of conduct. He made a note in his ledger. No further questions for this witness. As Blake stepped down, visibly shaken, Daniel caught Dominic Sullivan's gaze. The Attorney General was staring at him with a mixture of shock and calculating assessment. The first recognition had occurred. Now events would accelerate. That evening, Daniel received an expected call from Chief Judge Parr. What was that about today, Newton? The Sullivan questions. Establishing witness credibility through pattern evidence, Daniel replied calmly. Standard procedure. It felt targeted. The defense is already filing complaints about judicial bias. They're welcome to appeal any rulings they find objectionable. After hanging up, Daniel wasn't surprised when his secure monitoring system alerted him to movement in the corridor outside his hotel room. Through the security feed he'd installed, he watched as Blake Russo paced outside, clearly debating whether to knock. Finally, Blake approached the door and knocked firmly. Daniel opened it, maintaining his judicial demeanor. Captain Russo, this is highly inappropriate. Blake's expression was tightly controlled. We need to talk, Your Honor. Privately. That would be improper, given your role as a witness in an ongoing case. Cut the act, Blake hissed, lowering his voice. I know who you are. Daniel raised an eyebrow. Do you? You can't prove anything after all this time. That sounds remarkably like an admission, Captain. Daniel's voice remained measured. If you have concerns about the case, file them properly through counsel. Blake's composure cracked. How did you do it? How are you here? I'm not sure what you're implying, but this conversation is over. Daniel began to close the door. I suggest you leave before your presence here becomes known to others. This isn't over, Blake said, his voice shaking with barely controlled rage. On that point, Daniel replied, we are in complete agreement. After closing the door, Daniel immediately contacted courthouse security to report the inappropriate contact. Everything needed to be documented. Every reaction from Sullivan, Blake, and Vanessa needed to be on the record. The next morning, Daniel entered the courtroom to find an unusual motion on his desk. The defense was requesting his recusal based on demonstrated bias and potential undisclosed conflicts. Attached was a photograph of Nathan Doherty from 7 years earlier alongside a digitally aged version showing similarities to Judge Daniel Newton. The motion was signed by a new attorney who had joined the defense team overnight, none other than Dominic Sullivan himself, stepping in to represent his father-in-law personally. Daniel allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. They had taken the bait completely, publicly connecting themselves to Nathan Doherty's case in official court filings. When court was called to order, the gallery was packed. News of the dramatic recusal motion had spread quickly. The court notes a motion for recusal has been filed, Daniel began. Attorney General Sullivan, I see you've joined the defense team. Sullivan stood, exuding confidence. Yes, Your Honor. Given the serious nature of our concerns, I felt it necessary to appear personally. Very well. The motion alleges I have some connection to a former attorney named Nathan Doherty. Yes, Your Honor. We have reason to believe you and Doherty may be the same person, which would constitute an extraordinary conflict of interest. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Daniel remained impassive. That's a remarkable claim, Mr. Sullivan. What evidence supports it? Sullivan approached the bench with a folder. Facial recognition analysis suggesting significant structural similarities, despite obvious aging and cosmetic changes. Interesting, Daniel said, examining the materials. And your interest in Mr. Doherty stems from? Sullivan hesitated fractionally. His disappearance was a significant case when I served as district attorney. I see. And did you personally participate in the investigation of Mr. Doherty? To some extent, yes. Daniel nodded thoughtfully. The court will take this motion under advisement. I'll issue my ruling tomorrow morning. As everyone rose for his exit, Daniel caught Vanessa's eye in the gallery. Her expression confirmed what he already knew. She recognized him now. The shock and fear in her eyes was unmistakable. That night, Daniel finalized his preparations. Tomorrow would bring the culmination of 7 years of meticulous planning. He accessed a secure server and sent Miles the activation code for the final phase. In response, He received confirmation that U.S. Marshals have been provided with sealed evidence packages detailing the conspiracy against Nathan Doherty to be opened only upon specific judicial order. Everything was in place. Daniel slept soundly for the first time in years, ready for the reckoning that had been so long in coming. Chapter 7. Tipping Point. The courtroom was packed beyond capacity when Judge Daniel Newton took the bench the following morning. News of the dramatic recusal motion had spread throughout Portland's legal community, drawing spectators eager to witness the confrontation between the visiting judge and Oregon's Attorney General. Daniel surveyed the room with practiced judicial calm. The prosecution team looked uncomfortable, clearly blindsided by Sullivan's allegations. The defense table had been rearranged, with Dominic Sullivan now prominently seated beside his father-in-law. Blake and Vanessa occupied front-row seats in the gallery, both watching him with undisguised tension. "Be seated," Daniel intoned. "The court has reviewed the motion for recusal filed yesterday by the defense." Sullivan rose. "Your Honor, before you rule, we'd like to supplement our motion with additional evidence discovered overnight." "Proceed." Sullivan approached with another folder. "We've obtained employment records from the Illinois Bar showing discrepancies in Daniel Newton's background. Specifically, gaps that align perfectly with Nathan Doherty's disappearance." Daniel reviewed the documents, noting the careful legal maneuvering. Sullivan was trying to force his hand while avoiding explicit accusations that could be deemed defamatory if proven false. "Interesting research, Mr. Sullivan. Though I note these records merely show timeline consistencies, not actual evidence of identity. Is that correct?" Sullivan's confidence faltered slightly. "The circumstantial case is compelling, Your Honor. Combined with facial structure analysis and your unusual interest in the Doherty case during Captain Russo's testimony." "Yes, about that testimony," Daniel interrupted. "The court found it quite illuminating." He shuffled through papers on his bench, then looked up with deliberate slowness. "The motion for recusal is denied." Murmurs erupted throughout the courtroom. Sullivan appeared momentarily stunned. "Your Honor," he recovered quickly. "With all due respect, these concerns are based on speculation and circumstantial observations that would not constitute admissible evidence in any federal proceeding," Daniel completed firmly. "Furthermore, your motion strategically omits material facts about the Doherty case." "What facts?" Sullivan demanded, his composure slipping. "Facts that bring us to a more pressing matter." Daniel turned to the court clerk. "Please distribute the sealed order I prepared this morning." The clerk distributed copies of a document bearing the court seal to all parties. Daniel waited until Sullivan received his copy before continuing. "This is a judicial order compelling immediate production of evidence related to potential witness tampering, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy against rights under color of law, federal crimes that may have occurred in connection with the investigation of Nathan Doherty." The courtroom fell completely silent. "Furthermore," Daniel continued, "I am ordering the unsealing of evidence package in D 7545, currently in the custody of the U.S. Marshals Service." Sullivan quickly scanned the order, his face darkening. "This is unprecedented. You're ordering an investigation into a 7-year-old state case that has no bearing on." "On the contrary," Daniel interrupted, "it has direct bearing on this proceeding, as it involves potential criminal conduct by you, Captain Russo, and Vanessa Russo, all witnesses in this case." Blake half rose from his seat before his attorney yanked him back down. Vanessa sat frozen, her face ashen. "This is absurd," Sullivan blustered. "Your Honor is clearly pursuing a personal vendetta." "Mind your tone, Mr. Sullivan," Daniel warned. "Accusations of judicial impropriety should be made carefully and with supporting evidence. Do you have such evidence?" Sullivan hesitated, caught in the trap. If he directly accused the judge of being Nathan Doherty, he would need proof. If that proof involved admitting his role in framing Doherty, he would be confessing to federal crimes. "I merely suggest that Your Honor may have connections to this case that warrant further examination," Sullivan said finally. "The court disagrees." Daniel gestured to the U.S. Marshal standing nearby. "Marshal Jenkins, please execute the evidence order." The marshal nodded and left the courtroom. Daniel turned back to the stunned attorneys. "This court will take a 1-hour recess while the evidence package is retrieved. When we reconvene, we will address these matters fully." As Daniel rose to leave, he noticed Vanessa whispering urgently to Blake. Her expression panicked. Sullivan remained at the defense table, hurriedly conferring with other attorneys. The trap had been sprung, and they knew it. In his chambers, Daniel received an expected call from Chief Judge Parr. "What the hell are you doing, Newton?" she demanded. "You've ordered an investigation into the Attorney General in the middle of his father-in-law's trial. Evidence of potential federal crimes has come to light," Daniel replied calmly. "The court has an obligation to investigate. This looks personal. The defense's allegations are a desperate attempt to derail legitimate judicial inquiry," Daniel finished. "Judge Parr, I suggest you review the evidence package before forming conclusions. It's quite compelling." After hanging up, Daniel checked his secure feed. The courthouse was in chaos, with reporters gathering in the lobby, while Sullivan's team huddled in conference rooms. Most telling was the security footage showing Blake and Vanessa in a heated argument in a supposedly private corridor. Daniel zoomed in on their faces, reading their lips with a skill he'd developed during his years of preparation. "He knows everything," Vanessa was saying. "We have to get ahead of this." Blake's response was obscured as he turned away, but his agitation was clear. When court reconvened, U.S. Marshal Jenkins entered with a sealed evidence container. He placed it before the judge with formal documentation verifying its chain of custody. Daniel examined the seals and documentation carefully before addressing the courtroom. "The court is now in possession of evidence relevant to potential criminal conduct by parties connected to this case. Before proceeding, I must address a threshold question." He turned to Sullivan. "Mr. Sullivan, as both an attorney in this case and potentially implicated party, your dual role present a conflict. Do you wish to withdraw as counsel to preserve your rights against self-incrimination?" Sullivan's face flushed with anger. "I categorically deny any wrongdoing and refuse to be intimidated by these tactics." "Very well." Daniel opened the evidence container and removed several document folders. "The court will now review key evidence in open session to determine appropriate next steps." He held up the first exhibit. This contains audio recordings from Nathan Doherty's home office security system, capturing conversations between Vanessa Doherty, now Russo, and Captain Blake Russo planning to plant false evidence on Mr. Doherty's computer and orchestrate his public arrest. Sullivan shot to his feet. "Objection. This alleged evidence has never been authenticated or subjected to proper evidentiary standards. It could easily be fabricated. The recordings include metadata verification and forensic authentication," Daniel replied, unmoved. "More importantly, they have been under continuous secure custody since their creation." He held up another folder. "This contains documentation of the conspiracy to frame Mr. Doherty, including text messages between the parties discussing the plan to handcuff him publicly as a sick prank, their words, not mine, and destroy his reputation." Blake Russo abruptly stood. "Your Honor, I request counsel before these proceedings continue." "A wise decision, Captain Russo." Daniel nodded. "Does anyone else wish to secure representation before we proceed further?" From the gallery, Vanessa rose unsteadily. "I do, Your Honor." Daniel looked at Sullivan, who remained defiant. "Mr. Sullivan, this is a transparent attempt to derail a legitimate prosecution," Sullivan declared. "I move to dismiss these proceedings and report Your Honor to the Judicial Conduct Committee." Motion denied. Daniel's voice hardened. "The evidence before this court suggests a conspiracy to violate Mr. Doherty's civil rights under color of law, a federal crime with no statute of limitations when it involves falsification of evidence." He turned to the prosecutors. "The U.S. Attorney's Office will need to appoint special counsel to review these materials, as they implicate a sitting state attorney general." The lead prosecutor looked stunned, but nodded. "We'll contact the Justice Department immediately, Your Honor." Sullivan's face had gone from flushed to pale. "This is outrageous. You've orchestrated this entire—" "I've orchestrated nothing, Mr. Sullivan," Daniel interrupted coldly. "I merely allowed events to unfold naturally, much as you did 7 years ago when you conspired to destroy a man's life for your own benefit." The statement hung in the air, electric with implication. For the first time, Daniel allowed a hint of Nathan Doherty to show through his judicial facade, just enough for Sullivan to see the truth in his eyes. Sullivan stared at him, final recognition dawning. "You can't prove any of this," he said quietly. "I already have," Daniel replied. "The evidence was preserved all along, waiting for the right moment. Rather like I was." He addressed the entire courtroom. "This court is now in recess. U.S. Marshals will secure all evidence. The Justice Department will determine appropriate next steps regarding potential criminal charges against Attorney General Sullivan, Captain Russo, and Mrs. Russo." As Daniel rose to leave, he made eye contact with Vanessa one last time. Her expression held something beyond fear now, a dawning horror at the full scope of what was happening. The wheels of justice that had been set in motion 7 years ago were finally, inexorably, delivering their verdict. Chapter 8. Countermoves. For 3 days, Portland buzzed with the extraordinary developments. News outlets ran constant coverage of what they called the judge's gambit, the apparent return of a man believed dead to expose a conspiracy from a bench. The Justice Department had appointed a special counsel to investigate, and both Blake and Vanessa Russo had been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Dominic Sullivan, however, had not gone quietly. Using his political connections, he launched a counteroffensive, holding press conferences denouncing judicial overreach and personal vendetta justice. He filed emergency appeals and formal complaints with the Judicial Conduct Committee. Judge Daniel Newton had weathered the storm with professional detachment, continuing to preside over Senator Sullivan's corruption trial while recusing himself only for matters directly related to Dominic Sullivan, Blake, and Vanessa. In his hotel suite, now under 24-hour marshal protection due to death threats, Daniel reviewed developments with Miles Hargrove via secure connection. "Sullivan's fighting hard," Miles said. "He's called in every political favor he has." "Expected," Daniel replied. "But the evidence is irrefutable. That's not stopping him from trying to discredit it. And his team is pushing the narrative that you fabricated everything as part of an elaborate revenge scheme." Daniel smiled thinly, which is why chain of custody was so crucial. Every recording, every document has verification timestamps and authentication that predates my appointment to the bench. "The special counsel seems impressed with the evidence," Miles continued, "but Sullivan's trying to get the entire investigation moved to another jurisdiction. A delaying tactic. The venue doesn't change the facts." Miles hesitated. "There's something else. Vanessa's requested a meeting, off the record." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Interesting. Likely a trap." "Probably. But she specifically mentioned something about Calloway having insurance you don't know about." This was unexpected. Thomas Calloway had been the client whose case was at the center of the original conspiracy, the wealthy developer whose connections to Sullivan had led to Nathan Doherty being framed. "What kind of insurance?" "She wouldn't say, only that it involves you directly and could change everything." Daniel considered this. It could be desperation, a bluff to get him a meet. Or it could be genuine. Sullivan and his co-conspirators might have created additional insurance against Nathan Doherty that hadn't yet been discovered. Arrange it, he decided. Secure location, full recording, marshal presence in adjoining room. The meeting was set for that evening at a federal safe house. Daniel arrived first, surveying the sparse room with its single table and 2 chairs. He was no longer in judicial robes, but dressed in a simple suit. Not Daniel Newton the judge, not Nathan Doherty the victim, but someone in between. When Vanessa entered, he was struck by how much older she looked than her 45 years. Her designer clothes and careful makeup couldn't hide the exhaustion and fear in her eyes. "Thank you for meeting me," she said, her voice smaller than he remembered. Daniel gestured to the chair across from him, but said nothing. Vanessa sat, her hands fidgeting with her purse. "I don't even know what to call you." "Judge Newton is appropriate." She flinched slightly. That must have taken incredible planning, becoming a federal judge. Did you request this meeting to discuss my career path? Daniel asked coolly. No. She took a deep breath. I came to tell you something important. Something that might make you reconsider how far you push this. I'm listening. Before I tell you, I want you to know I regretted what happened. After Nathan disappeared, I realized how wrong it all was. Yet you married Blake, supported your brother's career, and enjoyed the fruits of your conspiracy for 7 years, Daniel observed. Your regret seems conveniently timed to your exposure. Vanessa's facade cracked. You don't know what it was like. Dominic controlled everything. He always has. Our father was the same way, ruthless, demanding absolute loyalty. Save the victim narrative, Daniel said flatly. You were a willing participant. I heard the recordings, remember? Good luck explaining this one. Your exact words as I was handcuffed. Tears welled in her eyes. I was a different person then. As was I. Daniel's voice remained unmoved. You mentioned Calloway having some kind of insurance. Explain. Vanessa composed herself. Calloway didn't just have connections to Dominic. He had blackmail material on all of us. His protection in case things went south. What kind of material? Videos, documents, testimony from people who'd create problems for anyone who crossed him. She hesitated, including evidence against you that never came to light. Daniel's expression didn't change. Be specific. Before you became Nathan's client, you were briefly involved in one of Calloway's earlier developments, a resort project in Bend. You reviewed some contracts, attended 2 meetings. Nathan didn't remember because it was handled mainly by a junior associate at your firm. This was true. Nathan Doherty had indeed briefly worked on a Calloway project years earlier, though his involvement had been minimal and forgettable. Go on. Calloway documented everything. He claims to have evidence that you helped structure deals to conceal environmental violations, felony violations. He manufactured paper trails, backdated memos with your signature. It's all lies, but it's convincing. Daniel considered this, and he's held this in reserve all these years. Dominic made him promise not to use it unless absolutely necessary. Insurance of last resort. She leaned forward. They're planning to release it all tomorrow. File criminal complaints, go to the media. They'll say you had a vendetta against Calloway that motivated you to frame my brother. A desperate play, Daniel noted. Easily disproven. Is it? Vanessa challenged. The evidence looks real. The timing works. And it gives them a counter-narrative. The corrupt lawyer who became a judge to pursue a personal vendetta. Why are you telling me this? Vanessa's expression changed. A flash of the calculating woman he'd once known appearing. Because I want a deal. Immunity. In exchange, I'll testify against Dominic and Blake. I'll confirm everything. The framing, the planted evidence, all of it. So there it was, self-preservation. Vanessa was offering to throw her brother and husband to the wolves to save herself. Why would I need your testimony? The evidence speaks for itself. Because Dominic has friends in the Justice Department. People who can bury investigations or create doubt. My direct testimony would make that impossible. Daniel stood and walked to the window, weighing options. Vanessa's offer was tactically valuable. Her insider testimony would indeed strengthen the case. But trusting her was dangerous. There's something else you should know, Vanessa added quietly. Blake kept a trophy from that night. The handcuffs he used on you. He's had them in his office drawer all these years. Daniel turned, his expression hardening. Sentimental of him. He told people they were from his first major arrest. But they're engraved with the date. Physical proof of what happened. This was potentially valuable. Physical evidence with documented chain of custody linking Blake directly to the incident. Where are these handcuffs now? In our home safe. I can get them. Daniel studied her carefully. And in exchange for this cooperation, you want full immunity. Yes, and a fresh start somewhere else. Her voice dropped. I know what I did was unforgivable, but I was under Dominic's influence my entire life. He controlled everything. Who I dated, who I married. Even Nathan was initially someone Dominic approved of because he thought he could be useful. Daniel felt a cold shock. Are you saying our marriage was arranged by your brother? Vanessa looked down. Not arranged, but encouraged. Dominic thought having his sister married to a rising defense attorney created useful connections. The revelation landed like a physical blow. Daniel had spent years rebuilding himself, planning his revenge, but had never questioned the foundation of his marriage itself. When did it change? When did I become a target rather than an asset? When you started asking questions about the Calloway case. When Dominic realized you couldn't be controlled. She looked up, her eyes pleading. But what I felt for you is real, Nathan. At least at first. Daniel processed this new information, his mind calculating revised probabilities and scenarios. If Vanessa was telling the truth about the fabricated evidence Calloway planned to release, it presented a significant complication. If she was lying about her feelings and involvement, it could be another trap. I'll need time to consider your offer, he said finally. There isn't much time. They're moving quickly. Daniel sat back down, his decision made. Here's what's going to happen. You will provide a complete sworn statement to the special counsel. Everything you know about the conspiracy against Nathan Doherty, your brother's corruption, and Calloway's operations. You will surrender the handcuffs with a sworn affidavit regarding their provenance. And my immunity? I'll recommend it to the special counsel based on the value of your cooperation. But I make no guarantees. Vanessa looked stricken. That's not enough. Dominic will destroy me. You should have considered that before participating in his schemes. Daniel's voice was implacable. Actions have consequences, Vanessa. Sometimes they take 7 years to arrive, but they always come due. As Vanessa left, escorted by marshals, Daniel contacted Miles with new instructions. They needed to prepare for Calloway's counterattack and secure additional evidence that would neutralize the fabricated environmental violations. The endgame was approaching faster than anticipated. Sullivan and his allies were cornered and desperate, making them both vulnerable and dangerous. But Nathan Doherty had spent 7 years preparing for this moment. Daniel Newton would not be outmaneuvered now. Chapter 9, Final Verdict. The federal courthouse was surrounded by media and protesters as Judge Daniel Newton arrived for what promised to be a decisive day. Public opinion had fractured along predictable lines. Some hailed him as a hero exposing corruption, while others condemned him as a vigilante abusing judicial power for personal revenge. Inside his chambers, Daniel reviewed the latest developments. Vanessa had followed through, providing the special counsel with a comprehensive sworn statement and surrendering the handcuffs, complete with date engraving and trace evidence that matched Nathan Doherty's DNA from old case files. Meanwhile, Calloway had indeed launched his counterattack, filing complaints with fabricated evidence of Nathan's alleged environmental crimes. But Daniel and Miles had been ready, producing documentation proving Nathan's minimal involvement with those projects and forensic evidence showing the backdated signatures were forgeries. Most significantly, the special counsel had moved with unexpected speed, securing indictments against Dominic Sullivan, Blake Russo, and Thomas Calloway for conspiracy against rights, obstruction of justice, and evidence tampering. Vanessa had received qualified immunity in exchange for her cooperation. Daniel's secure phone buzzed with a message from Miles. Sullivan requesting meeting before court. Says it's your last chance for mutual resolution. After conferring with the marshals about security, Daniel agreed to the meeting, 10 minutes before court in his chambers, with marshals outside the door. When Dominic Sullivan entered, the transformation from his usual confident self was striking. Though still impeccably dressed, the Attorney General looked haggard, the strain of recent events evident in his face. "Thank you for seeing me," Sullivan said, his tone carefully modulated. Daniel gestured to a chair, but remained standing himself. "Make it brief, Mr. Sullivan." Court convenes shortly. Sullivan sat, studying Daniel with a mixture of anger and reluctant admiration. "You know, in another life, we could have been allies. You've shown remarkable strategic patience. I doubt that's what you came to discuss." "No." Sullivan leaned forward. "I came to propose a resolution that serves both our interests. The special counsel has offered a plea deal, one that would require my cooperation regarding certain political figures above my pay grade. That's between you and the Justice Department." "Not entirely." Sullivan's eyes narrowed. "My cooperation would necessarily include detailed accounts of the Doherty matter. The full story would emerge, including how Nathan Doherty faked his death and systematically created a false identity to infiltrate the federal judiciary. The threat was clear. Sullivan would make Daniel's methods public, potentially jeopardizing his judicial position. That's a fascinating perspective, Daniel replied calmly. Considerably different from your earlier position that I couldn't possibly be Nathan Doherty. We both know the truth now. The question is what happens to Judge Daniel Newton once it's all public. Sullivan leaned back. Even with our crimes exposed, your methods raise serious questions about judicial fitness. Your point. My counteroffer. I plead to reduce charges with minimal sentence. Blake takes the heaviest charges. Calloway cooperates regarding other matters. And most importantly, the official narrative never acknowledges that Judge Daniel Newton was once Nathan Doherty. Your judicial career continues unblemished. Daniel studied Sullivan. Even cornered, the man was looking for leverage, trying to salvage something from his collapsing position. And if I refuse, then I fight with everything I have. I make your identity and methods the central issue. The media will love it. The man who infiltrated the judiciary for revenge. Even if I go down, your career ends too. Sullivan smiled thinly. Mutually assured destruction. Daniel walked to the window, considering his response. The truth was, he had already contemplated this scenario. Judge Daniel Newton's identity and qualifications were genuine, created legally through proper channels. His judicial record was impeccable. But the revelation of his true history would undoubtedly create a media circus and potential ethics inquiries. You're assuming I care about preserving my judicial career above seeing justice done, Daniel said finally. Don't you? After all the work to build this identity, to reach this position of power. Sullivan's voice turned almost admiring. It was masterfully done. Seems a waste to throw it away just to see me in prison. Daniel turned back to face him. That assumes seeing you face consequences was my only objective. Wasn't it? Revenge for what we did to you. Justice, not revenge. Daniel's voice remained calm. From the beginning, this was about exposing corruption in the system. Corruption you and your associates exploited to destroy an innocent man. My personal vindication was secondary. Sullivan studied him, genuinely puzzled. You expect me to believe you orchestrated all this out of some abstract commitment to justice? No, I orchestrated it because the system failed and someone needed to hold you accountable. Daniel checked his watch. Our time is up, Mr. Sullivan. The court awaits. Sullivan stood slowly. Consider my offer. Once I start talking to the special counsel, there's no going back. I already have considered it. And declined. Daniel gestured to the door. The truth comes out today, Mr. Sullivan. All of it. In the courtroom, the atmosphere was electric as Daniel took the bench. All parties were present. The now diminished Senator Sullivan defense team, the prosecution, and spectators, including reporters for national outlets. Dominic Sullivan sat with his defense attorney, his expression resigned. The court notes several matters requiring immediate attention, Daniel began. First, regarding the motion for judicial disqualification previously denied, new information has come to light that the court must address. A hushed stillness fell over the room. Specifically, information regarding the identity and background of the presiding judge. Daniel's voice remained steady, judicial. The record should reflect that prior to assuming the identity of Daniel Newton, I was indeed Nathan Doherty, the attorney allegedly implicated in misconduct 7 years ago, who subsequently disappeared. Gasps and murmurs erupted throughout the courtroom. Sullivan's eyes widened in shock. He hadn't expected this direct admission. Order, Daniel commanded, and the room quieted. This disclosure is made, not in response to pressure or negotiation, but in service to the truth this court is sworn to uphold. He continued with meticulous clarity. The record will further show that Nathan Doherty was the victim of a criminal conspiracy orchestrated by then-District Attorney Dominic Sullivan, Police Detective Blake Russo, and Vanessa Doherty, now Russo, to frame him for crimes he did not commit. Daniel held up a document. The court has received confirmation from the special counsel that indictments have been issued against these individuals, based on evidence preserved by Nathan Doherty before his disappearance and authenticated by multiple forensic experts. He turned to face the gallery directly. As to my own actions, following the attempt to frame me, I legally changed my identity through proper channels, obtained legitimate educational credentials, and pursued a legal career that eventually led to the federal bench. At no point did I falsify qualifications or credentials. I merely sought a position from which the truth could finally be established. Sullivan's attorney rose. Your Honor, this extraordinary admission clearly necessitates your immediate recusal from all matters related to the Sullivan family. I agree, Daniel replied. Effective immediately, I am recusing myself from United States versus Lawrence Sullivan and all related proceedings. Chief Judge Parr will reassign the case to another judge. He continued before anyone could interrupt. However, before doing so, there is one final matter. Given the clear evidence of witness tampering and obstruction affecting multiple federal cases, this court hereby refers all evidence of criminal conspiracy by Dominic Sullivan, Blake Russo, Vanessa Russo, and Thomas Calloway to the Special Counsel for immediate action. Daniel gathered his papers. The record should reflect that I have submitted my resignation as a federal judge to the Chief Judge, effective upon completion of this proceeding. While my judicial qualifications were legitimately earned, I recognize that the extraordinary circumstances of my path to the bench require this step to preserve public confidence in our judicial system. He looked directly at Dominic Sullivan. Justice may be delayed, Mr. Sullivan, but it is rarely denied forever. This court stands adjourned. As Daniel rose to leave the bench for the final time, a reporter called out, Your Honor, do you regret any of your actions? Daniel paused, then answered simply, I regret that extraordinary measures were necessary to expose the truth. But I do not regret seeking justice, even at personal cost. In the following months, the Judge's Gambit case became a national sensation. Dominic Sullivan and Blake Russo were convicted on multiple federal charges and sentenced to substantial prison terms. Vanessa, with her immunity deal, avoided incarceration but faced professional and social ostracism. Senator Lawrence Sullivan's case was assigned to another judge, where he was eventually convicted on reduced charges due to his advanced age. As for Nathan Doherty, no longer Judge Daniel Newton, he declined all interview requests and book deals, withdrawing from public view. The man who had orchestrated one of the most remarkable acts of personal justice in legal history simply disappeared again, this time by choice rather than necessity. But in legal circles, a new consulting firm emerged, Doherty Justice Initiatives, specializing in assisting victims of prosecutorial misconduct and wrongful convictions. The firm took no public cases and made no announcements, but its success rate in overturning unjust convictions was remarkable. And occasionally, lawyers fighting impossible odds against corrupt systems would receive unexpected assistance, strategic advice, crucial evidence suddenly discovered, or powerful connections mysteriously materializing to support their cases. Justice, it seemed, had found its champion, not from the bench, but from the shadows where Nathan Doherty had learned to thrive. The man who had once been handcuffed as a cruel prank had transcended personal revenge to become something more enduring, a silent guardian of the system that had once failed him. The final verdict wasn't just against those who had wronged him, but for all those who might suffer similar injustice in the future. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.